Hey guys, what's up? Two Wheel Turban. Today we're doing a post-it note review on the 2020 KTM Super Duke R. And I really like this review style. I've seen it on MCN with Michael Nevesey. I'm pretty sure a lot of YouTubers use this, but he might have been one of the first, so gotta give credit to him. But this is just a really good way to, I think, review a bike because you get to really point out the specifics in certain aspects of the bike without forgetting about it. And it's a really good visual of what points you're going to talk about. So today we're going to do that. So yeah, let's jump into it. All right, let's jump into the review. So basically we're just going to work front to back, go from post-it note to post-it note. And the first one that I have is talking about this headlight. So this headlight's pretty amazing. I mean, first time you see one of these bikes, it's probably going to be the #1 thing you're going to remember from it. The daytime running lights are so angular, so powerful. Those LEDs are pretty amazing. And while it's a really cool, cool factor, it's definitely not a gimmick. This thing at night is amazing. You can see so well down the road, just crystal clear. My R6 was probably half as good as it, maybe even worse. So that's definitely a pretty amazing thing about the headlight. Another interesting thing to note about this headlight that you kind of won't realize until you see it up close, or maybe someone explains it, is in the middle of it, it's actually hollow, and that's your ram air intake. So it works really well when you're flying down the road. All that air just tunnels in straight into the headlight like that, right into the air box. So it's also extremely functional. All right, so making our way down here, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the suspension. So KTM's pretty unique. They're not like Ducati or MV Agusta or anyone like that who uses Öhlins suspension, which is kind of known as the best. KTM uses this WP suspension. And this bike is of course my first time riding WP, and I'm pretty pleasantly surprised. With this bike, it's definitely really, it's more race oriented and pretty stiff, but even though it's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes on bumpy roads, right when you find a nice curvy road and you dive into the corner, the confidence you get from the suspension, the rear suspension, is pretty amazing. You just stay super planted right on rails. You never really feel like something, your front tire is going to slip out or anything like that. You feel super grounded, and the suspension really does its job as you're diving into corners and maintaining extreme lean angles. All right, so right after suspension, the next thing to dive into is the brakes on this bike. I mean, my Fiat, I'm pretty sure, had smaller brakes than this. The braking power you get out of this Brembo setup is ridiculous. You just got huge rotors, huge calipers. The stopping power is insane. I never grab more than a few millimeters of brakes, and the bike's always stopping super well. So it just gives you a ton of confidence when you're coming into a corner. Maybe you hit some triple-digit speeds and you need to slow down really quick to dive into the next corner. The bike has more than enough braking power, which is so important with a high-performance bike like this. In conjunction with it functioning extremely well, I think it just looks pretty awesome with the huge Brembo in red and the insanely sized rotors. But yeah, the brakes are definitely fantastic on this bike. All right, so the next post-it note's kind of hiding back here, and that is the steering stabilizer. So on a bike like this where the front wheel's lifting and pretty much every gear under hard acceleration, having a really good steering stabilizer is extremely important because that's going to prevent some wobbles, tank slappers, all the stuff you don't want. So you need a good steering stabilizer. And while this one seems to do its job decently, I think KTM should have made it a little stiffer where it really tries to keep that front wheel tracking, because I noticed at high speeds that front wheel starts to kind of do this, and that's definitely a scary feeling when you're going over 100 miles an hour. You don't want that front wheel doing that. So for an OEM steering stabilizer, I think it's decent, but I think in the future with the 4th generation, KTM should look at kind of adjusting that and making it even more powerful and keeping that front wheel in a straight line. All right, the next post-it note that we're going to look at is this one up here, and that's talking about the controls on the bike. Now, if you look at the 1st generation or 2nd generation Super Duke R, this 3rd generation has really just evolved a ton with its controls, and they're so much more just user-friendly with gloves on and stuff like that. You can adjust on the fly and just know that you're pressing the right button instead of stuff like that. But while that is true, there are a couple things to note about the bike that KTM's definitely going to have to fix in the next generation, and that is the turn signal is horrible. You don't really have any feel. It's really mushy, and you never know if you really turned off your turn signal or even turned it on. It's not that confidence inspiring when it's time to change lanes and do it legally. And in conjunction with that, also when you have gloves on, they put the high beam location in kind of a tough location where anytime you reach for the clutch, sometimes you bump that, so you end up blinding the people in front of you. So those are only two kind of nitpicky things regarding the controls, but other than that, they look awesome and they function pretty well. All right, so staying up here, this post-it note's talking a little bit about the TFT display, which if you've seen some of my videos in the past, you know that I really love this TFT display. There's not much to hate about it. I personally think it's one of the best in the industry right now. I think even better than Ducati, Yamaha, all those big guys. I think KTM really has got it down. It's pretty good. You know, it's super visible. You see all the pertinent information, not a bunch of just random numbers and stuff like that. It's the stuff you actually need to see, and it's right there, easily to see in direct sunlight, at night. Anything. KTM really knew what they were doing, making this TFT display. Works really well with the bike and is integrated really well. So the only thing that there is something to kind of hate about it, it's not necessarily the display itself, but it's KTM's My Ride functionality. You kind of have to download this app to work navigation and music through the TFT. I've heard that on the App Store it has like an average 1 star out of 5 stars, and you have to pay money for it. And KTM really needs to work out the software behind that to make that more usable. Pretty much no one uses it, even though it is on the TFT display. All right, the next part of the bike is something that maybe you don't really consider when you're buying a bike, but is something I feel like you should consider a little bit, and that's how the mirrors perform. Because when you're riding, you really want to see what everyone's doing around you. That's so important nowadays, especially with all the distractions and stuff. Unfortunately, I think KTM did make the mirrors kind of ugly, but usually from OEM, manufacturers typically can't do a really beautiful job with that. But although they're ugly, they're actually super functional. I noticed at high speeds, they don't seem to vibrate too much. So from a functionality perspective, these mirrors are pretty awesome. I think if you're looking for a more aesthetic bike, you might put on some CRG, bar end aero mirrors. That definitely cleans up the look of the bike, makes it look more aggressive. But for functionality, honestly, sticking with the OEM is probably a better idea. All right, so before we move further back, we're going to keep working through these post-it notes. The next thing that I kind of want to talk about is that the lack of a radiator guard. I don't know why manufacturers don't have them installed OEM. It doesn't make much sense. I'm pretty sure Ducati doesn't do it. Pretty much most manufacturers don't do it, and it's really annoying because these bikes have absolutely huge radiators, to keep the engine functioning properly and stuff, but it's like almost a $20,000 bike. I think these companies really need to put in some research and development into developing some good functional radiator guards. I think that would be great. So that's kind of one thing to dislike about the bike, but it's not really expected. All right, the next thing to point out about this bike is kind of one of the obvious one, and is really just the heart of the KTM Super Duke R, and that's of course the amazing LC8 V-twin engine that's in here. There's really not much to say about it. I mean, everyone knows how great of an engine the Super Duke R has. I mean, it's a fantastic engine. There's not much to say. As a viewer, I'm sure you guys already know how amazing this is. Anyone who does a review on this is always talking about the engine of the Super Duke R. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'd rather talk about more of the specific things that you kind of find out when you ride this bike, but definitely something to point out. All right, the next thing that I want to point out, and it's probably one of my favorite parts of this bike, is the quick shifter. And I know this is the rear brake, but for filming purposes, just kind of put it next to that lever. But the quick shifter on this bike is just fantastic. And if you buy one of these bikes, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to drop the money for the tech pack to enable the quick shifter, because it's just an absolutely necessary item on this bike. The bike without it is probably still a 10, but if you want to go up to an 11, well, you're going to need that quick shifter. So, all right, the next thing I want to talk about is actually the gas cap. And I know no one really talks about the gas cap on a bike. Like, why would you ever mention that in a review? But for this bike, I feel like it's necessary since this bike is keyless. You have no really spot to put in a key, turn it, just all proximity. And so the gas cap actually works like that also. And you know, it's funny, at first, when I first got this bike, it came with a full tank of gas, and I was riding it around, and it eventually came time to fill it up again, and it would not open. I was like, oh my gosh, is it having some sort of electrical issue where something's not communicating, since it's this, you know, keyless functionality. It's something that's completely new, not a manual key opening thing. So I actually had to go to the dealer. They couldn't even figure it out for a solid 10 to 15 minutes. And then they called over like one of their biggest mechanics, and he started just putting all his weight on the gas cap, and then it popped open. So after that, it's been working perfectly fine, so no complaints. But at first, that was kind of scary. I don't know if any of you owners of this bike have experienced that, but so far it's pretty good. Definitely a cool feature. Makes filling up a lot easier, and it's actually a great looking gas cap. All right, so the next thing to talk about this bike is the frame geometry. It's got this super cool, you know, kind of tubular chassis. It looks awesome, makes it look super, I don't know, just allows the engine to really be seen. You don't have a bunch of plastic covering it or anything, and it shows all the cool geometric lines and stuff. But other than, you know, the coolness of it, the frame itself is actually great. I don't know how they designed such great angles, because the bike can be ridden in a really comfortable position, but it also can be ridden almost like a super sport. So somehow KTM found that perfect balance where the way the angles are in the frame and the geometry allows comfort riding, but at the same time, when it's ready to tear up some twisty roads or the track, well, you can definitely do that as well. The next post-it note I got on here is actually the blacked out rear sets and passenger pegs. I think this is so cool because most bikes, whenever you go to a dealer or anything like that, it seems like all the pegs and stuff are just normal, like steel, chrome, you know, like they're silver, just basic looking silver OEM looking rear sets, where KTM's from the factory almost look like they're aftermarket. The levers also black. It's just, I think even the passenger, that's so cool that they get such an awesome black finish on the pegs, and it just makes the bike look even cooler from the factory. It's a subtle thing, but it's something that I've noticed and have really come to like about the bike. All right, the next post-it note is the seat. I mean, this seat, typically most OEM seats are horrible, but I have absolutely no desire to ever change this seat to some aftermarket one. KTM did an amazing job where it looks super, you know, slimline, but at the same time, it's really comfortable. It's really, really comfortable. I don't know how they did that. And it looks great. You can move around easily when it's time to get aggressive at high speeds and stuff. The seat works great, and then it's also great for just comfort, upright riding. So no plans to change it. I really like the seat. It's something to point out. All right, the next thing that I have on here isn't super important, but it's kind of annoying if you're trying to keep your bike clean, and it's this Mudguard. It's really just ineffective, and it throws everything up everywhere when you start to ride in the rain. And I'm sure it gets even worse when you lose this. I'm sure it just flies up everywhere. But so while it is annoying that the bike gets dirty, I actually like that KTM kept it so minimalistic, because it really exposes that amazing, just that huge tire right there. That's a ton of rubber, and makes the single-sided swing arm look even better. All right, the next thing to note on this bike is the exhaust. So if you haven't seen yet one of my recent uploads, I did a video on the stock exhaust system on this bike, and if you haven't seen that yet, you should definitely check it out. I'll put a little card somewhere where you can click on it and hear what this bike really sounds like from the third person perspective. For being Euro 5 compliant exhaust, I think it's awesome. It's definitely kind of big, probably weighs a ton, so I'm sure you lose a lot of weight going aftermarket, but I really just like how they routed the exhaust, so no complaints there. All right, the next thing to talk about is the single-sided swing arm, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but owning a bike with a single-sided swing arm is something that the average person's probably not going to notice, but when you set a bike with a normal swing arm setup, you really start to realize how much more beautiful this setup is, and just exposing this amazing right side. Not to say the left side's bad, but this is definitely the prettier side of it. All right, the next thing I kind of want to talk about is passenger comfort. So I've only taken my brother on here so far, I'm pretty sure, and he said it was decent. It's definitely not a Goldwing. He's ridden on the Goldwing, and it's not like that, of course. But for being a sport bike, not too bad, not too bad. Better than my R6, he said. It's just kind of scary because you got this huge tire just right behind you, nothing protecting you, and this bike's really wheelie prone, so kind of scary for a passenger. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is this stock fender. This is definitely kind of a negative attribute of this bike, but you know, it worked for one of my recent videos for mounting cameras and stuff, so it kind of has some functionality, but this is probably going to be one of my first modifications, is eliminating this with fender eliminator, but something to bring up. All right, one of the last post-it notes is the tail light. I think for an OEM tail light, I don't know if there's any really prettier ones. It's all blacked out. A lot of taillights are red. I think having a black one makes it so much cooler. The fact that it's tinted, but it's also extremely functional. Yeah, it's tinted, but it's super bright at night, and definitely drivers can see you. The last thing I have is talking about the tires that come OEM with this, and that's the Bridgestone, I think the SR22s. Let's take a look. I'm pretty sure it is S22Rs. That's what it is. But these tires have been fantastic. I think once I run through them, I'll probably replace them again with that. Unless one of you guys who owns this bike recommends something else. Really like these tires, ton of grip, ton of confidence. But yeah, guys, that's a quick post-it note review of the KTM Super Duke R. I may do one whenever I get to like 5,000 miles or sometime later in the future to see how my thoughts have changed. But those are just a few of the things that I felt like I wanted to talk about this bike if you're considering buying one or you're just curious about it. I feel like those are the main points that are good discussion points on this bike. But hope you guys enjoyed that video. More to come with the Super Duke R and some more motorcycles I can get my hands on. And thank you guys for the support, and just thanks for being here and watching my videos. I'll catch you on the next one.